In today's video, we start a brand new series on opening traps. In this series, I'm going to be selecting some of the most popular openings, in today's case, the Ruy Lopez, and I will be showing you traps from the white side as well as from the black side so that you know what to try and catch out your opponents with and also what to avoid no matter which color you're playing. Today, I will show two traps for the black side. That's Noah's trap, one of the oldest traps in the Ruy Lopez. Mortimer's trap, less common but very, very sneaky trap. And finally, from the white side, I will show a very subtle trap, maybe my favorite in the Ruy Lopez, and that is the so-called Tarrasch Trap. So let's dive right in. The first trap we're going to look at is the Noah's Ark Trap. And this one is incredibly important to know from either side because so many beginner players have fallen for this. In fact, one of my earliest chess memories is when I was about 12 years old playing a game and falling for exactly this trap from the white side. So let's take a look at how it happens. After e4, e5, white goes knight f3, knight c6, and with bishop b5, we have the Ruy Lopez. Now black plays the move a6, and after bishop to a4, this is all the most popular way of playing. Black goes for d6. This is the so-called modern Steinitz defense. After d6, white normally plays castle or c3. And one of the very good reasons for this is because of Noah's Ark Trap. If instead white plays the move pawn to d4, they're dangerously close to falling into it. After b5, bishop to b3, and now black captures the pawn on d4. Now, if you don't know the trap, what you will probably do is you will take the knight, and after pawn takes, now that white is down a pawn, you will recover your pawn with the queen. However, this position is already lost. You can, if you want, pause the video and try and figure out the trap, but I will now show it. After queen takes d4, black has the move pawn to c5, striking at the queen. And the problem is that no matter where the queen goes, black will go c4 and the bishop is lost. It is the shape of these pawns that some people speculate is the reason for the name Noah's Ark, while others suggest that it's a reference to the fact that the trap is so old, it's as old as time itself, or at least as old as Noah's Ark. In any case, it doesn't really matter what the reason is. The one thing that we must be careful is to avoid falling into it. Just one last detail about this position is that white can try the move queen to d5 and hoping that here black will quickly play c4 and lose the rook on a8. White may also hope that black will go a move like rook to b8 and fall for checkmate here on f7. So we have to be careful if we are black here. The move is bishop e6, hitting the queen. And yes, it's true, white has a check. Now the rook, of course, is defended. Black goes back with the bishop. White goes back. And now it's very different because of the rook being defended. Black is in time to play c4. So white loses a piece. And can you believe that I was looking at recent games in this and none other than the World Championship challenger in a blitz game played online in 2020 fell for this trap from the white side. So it just goes to show that this trap can catch out absolutely anyone in a fast online game. The second trap is a very amusing one. It's called Mortimer's trap. So let's reset the position and I will show you that. So white, as always, starts with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop to b5. And Mortimer's trap does not start with the move a6, but instead with knight to f6. This is the so-called Berlin variation against the Ruy Lopez. And here, one of white's main options is to go pawn to d3 in order to defend the pawn on e4. Now, most of the time what black plays here is a move like bishop to c5 or pawn to d6. But the sneaky Mortimer trap is with this move knight e7. Black says, or rather pretends, that what they want to do is get the knight over to g6 and maybe away from that annoying pressure from the bishop. And many white players they take the bait and they think that black has forgotten about this pawn on e5. So white takes the pawn, but in fact here, white is already losing. The sneaky trap that black has is pawn to c6. Striking at this bishop, and when the unsuspecting white player plays bishop c4, we now go queen a5 check, and black wins a piece. Now, even though thousands of games have continued exactly like this, we do have to be careful if we get this from the black side. We have to be careful about one sneaky counter trap that white can hit us with. And that is the move knight to c4. And when I looked at the online games, most black players here are so enthusiastic about winning that piece that they capture it. But perhaps you can see here what the problem is. White here, I will now show. White has knight to d6 with a beautiful smothered checkmate. So this is a very, very important trick to avoid. How do we avoid it? Well, after knight to c4 here, we can simply play knight g6, in this way covering the d6 square. And the reason why we still win a piece is that after bishop a4, black has b5, and this fork means that white must lose at least one piece for only a pawn. So these are the two traps that I wanted to show you from the black side. They're very important if you're playing the Ruy Lopez. I'm sure that if you try them out, you will have success with them and you will catch many players with them. And at the same time, if you're playing against the Ruy Lopez, they're just as important to be aware of. Let's now dive into the one trap in the from the white side where it's black that needs to be very careful. And that is the Tarrasch Trap. So here we once again start with the Ruy Lopez after bishop to b5. And now the Tarrasch Trap happens after the move d6, the so-called Steinitz variation. Now after d6, white plays d4. And after bishop d7, the reason why d4 is such a strong move is that if pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn, the knight is under pressure because of the pin. So d4 makes a lot of sense, and black normally likes to unpin with bishop d7. Now knight to c3 developing, knight f6, castle, and bishop e7. So black is developing, and you might be thinking to yourself, why doesn't white capture this knight and then take these pawns and win a pawn? Now, the reason why black is not worried about this is because after bishop takes, pawn takes, pawn takes, if white takes this pawn, black will swap off queens and now in this position win back their pawn with bishop takes e4. The reason why this is important to know is because in the position that we're going to show, if we go back, bishop e7, after rook e1, many black players still believe that they can win back the e4 pawn if we take their knight. So let me show what I mean. Now in this position, black castles, and suddenly they have fallen into the trap known as the Tarrasch Trap. Why is it called the Tarrasch Trap? It's because of an old master player known as Tarrasch, who actually managed to catch out two master level opponents of the time with this exact trap. Now after castle, white goes bishop takes knight, bishop takes knight, pawn takes, and we swap off queens first. Now black normally takes the queen, and black's idea is that when we take the pawn, they can still grab our pawn on e4. The reason why they think this is because if knight takes bishop, knight takes knight, rook takes knight, there is a back rank mate here with rook to d1. But there is one important detail that the black player has overlooked. So let's go back. In this position, after they play bishop takes e4, we do take, they take, but now we play the very clever move knight to d3. And this move is so strong because of the bad placement of black's pieces, the bishop and the knight. Black can try to defend because, of course, if they move the knight anywhere, we will take the bishop. So black can try to defend, but we kick the knight out with f3. And if black tries to move bishop c5 check, it's possible to go king f1, but this is not so clear. And there's an important reason for this, because when the bishop goes back, if we now take this knight, pawn takes, strikes at our knight, and strikes at our king. And if we go knight f4, now black plays g5, and we give back the piece. So this is very important to know. So what should we do? And this is why it's such a subtle trap. We should take the bishop, and after knight takes knight, it seems as though black has managed to escape using tactical means. But we have one final point. Bishop g5 strikes at the rook. Now, the rook can move and can even move to defend the knight. Now we go bishop e7, hitting the rook and the knight, and no matter where the rook goes, finally we can kick this rook away with c4. And the problem is that once the rook moves, that knight is falling. So black has nothing better to do than to play a move like king f7, let us take the rook, and then get a bishop for it. But this position is a winning endgame because we have a rook, which is a lot more valuable than the knight. So for me, this is an absolutely beautiful trap and probably my favorite trap in the whole of the Ruy Lopez. But I should say one more detail about it, which is what happens if we're going back now, what happens if in this position here, black were to play the other rook capture. Now, after knight takes e5, bishop takes e4, knight takes e4, knight takes e4, knight d3, we use the same trick, f5, f3. Now, if they give this check, what you might notice is if we now take their bishop, let them take us, their rook is no longer on f8, so there is no trick with bishop g5 and bishop e7. But even though it's a disadvantage that the rook isn't on f8 for this idea, it's an advantage for this king f1 idea. Why? Because without the rook on f8, when this bishop moves, we can now take, and remember that line where the rook was here, black was recovering their piece with f takes e4, hitting our knight, and a discovered check. But here, that is not the case, so after f takes e4, we can take the pawn, and we're up a full piece. This is even better than the main line. So that is the so-called Tarrasch Trap. It's much harder to remember than the other ones, but the upside is that it's actually also much easier to fall for your opponents. So it's one definitely worth thinking about and keeping it in mind and learning it if you are playing from the white side against the Ruy Lopez. Anyway, that is it for this video. If you've enjoyed it, if you like these traps, if you knew about them, if you didn't know about them, any suggestions for improvement, I'm always happy to hear your comments. If you did like the video, drop me a like, always helps me out. And if you want to see more videos like these, then please subscribe, and I will be back very, very soon. So hope you enjoyed.